Ethan had always been drawn to forgotten places, the eerie beauty of decay, the stories left behind in silence. When he first heard of the abandoned carnival on the outskirts of Ravensbrook, he knew he had to see it for himself. The place had been shuttered for decades, yet whispers of strange lights flickering through the ruins surfaced every few years. Late one evening, armed with a flashlight and a camera, Ethan ventured beyond the rusted chain-link fence. The once vibrant entrance archway now sagged under layers of rust and ivy, its peeling paint barely revealing the words, "Holloway's Grand Carnival, where dreams come alive." As he stepped onto the cracked pavement, an unsettling stillness settled over him. The wind barely stirred, and the silence was thick, pressing against his ears. The Ferris wheel loomed in the distance, its skeletal remains frozen mid-spin. Torn banners flapped limply in the stagnant air. Ethan clicked his camera, the flash momentarily illuminating the empty ticket booth. That was when he saw it, a faint glow flickering beyond the carousel. His breath hitched. No electricity had run through this place in decades. He adjusted his flashlight and cautiously moved toward the source. The carousel stood in eerie perfection, its once bright horses now dulled with grime, their glass eyes reflecting his light. Then, the faint glow strengthened. Ethan gasped as he saw a row of bulbs above the ride sputter to life, casting long shadows across the ground. A cold shiver traced his spine. He turned, scanning the area. No one. Just the ruins of a forgotten carnival. Then, from behind him, the calliope began to play. The tune was slow, distorted, yet unmistakably cheerful. The organ pipes wheezed as if the song itself struggled to stay alive. Ethan's breath quickened. He raised his camera, snapping a picture of the carousel. When the flash went off, he saw something. No, someone, standing between the painted horses. A girl. She wore a frilly, old-fashioned dress, her pale hands clutching the pole of a horse frozen mid-gallop. Her face was obscured by long, dark hair. Ethan's pulse pounded. He lowered the camera, but the carousel was empty again. No girl. No flickering lights. Only silence. A whisper drifted through the air, soft as the rustling leaves. "You shouldn't have come." The lights above the carousel burst in a cascade of sparks. The calliope's melody distorted into a low, guttural growl before cutting off completely. Ethan turned and ran, his breath ragged. But just as he reached the entrance arch, he froze. The rusted gates were no longer there. The path he had come from had vanished. And behind him, the carousel began to turn. Ethan's heart pounded as the carousel groaned to life behind him. The hollow clatter of rusted gears sent an eerie echo through the empty carnival grounds. He spun around, expecting to see the girl again, but the ride was empty. No riders, no operator, just the mechanical creaks of something that should have been lifeless. He fumbled with his flashlight, its weak beam barely cutting through the growing darkness. The path he'd entered through was gone, swallowed by the carnival as if he had never arrived. His only choice was to push forward, deeper into the ruins. Ahead, the towering remnants of the big top tent loomed like a collapsed beast, its tattered fabric swaying in the non-existent breeze. A faded sign lay half-buried in the dirt. "Welcome to the Grand Holloway Spectacle. Thrills, chills, and wonders await." Ethan hesitated. He knew the stories, about the carnival's sudden closure, the people who had vanished on its last night. But he never believed the legends. Until now. He lifted his camera, snapping a photo of the entrance. As the flash lit up the darkness, he caught a glimpse of movement inside. A shape, tall, looming, just beyond the ruined fabric. He swallowed hard and stepped inside. The air was heavy, thick with dust and the scent of something rotten. Torn banners drooped from skeletal poles. Rows of wooden benches stood abandoned, their paint chipped and peeling. At the center, a massive circular stage stretched beneath the ruined ceiling, its floor littered with broken props. Then he saw them. Scattered across the seats were mannequins. At least, they looked like mannequins. Dressed in faded carnival attire, they sat eerily still, their featureless faces turned toward the stage. Ethan shuddered. One of them moved. A slight tilt of the head. He aimed his flashlight, the beam flickering as it landed on the figure. It was closer now, no longer on the bench, but standing. Its head slowly turned toward him. A whisper slithered through the air. The show must go on. The floodlights above the stage sputtered to life with a deafening hum, bathing the area in an unnatural yellow glow. The shadows cast by the mannequins stretched unnaturally long, twisting across the floor like reaching hands. Then, the laughter started. Low at first, like a distant chuckle, but soon it built, layered voices, high-pitched, guttural, inhuman. The mannequins trembled, their bodies jerking as if waking from a long slumber. Ethan stumbled back, but something grabbed his wrist. Cold. Clammy. He gasped, spinning around. The girl from the carousel stood inches away. This time, he saw her face, pale, hollow eyes, lips stitched shut. She shook her head violently, her fingers tightening around his wrist. "You need to run." The laughter turned to screams. And the mannequins began to move. Ethan's breath came in ragged gasps as the girl's grip tightened on his wrist. Her stitched lips trembled as if she was trying to speak, but no words came, only the desperate urgency in her hollow eyes. Behind them, the mannequins jerked to life, their stiff limbs twitching unnaturally as they stepped down from the wooden benches. The laughter had stopped. Now, there was only the sound of footsteps, heavy, synchronized, approaching. Ethan yanked his arm free from the girl's grasp and stumbled backward. His flashlight flickered wildly as he turned toward the exit of the big top, but the entrance flap was gone. The once torn canvas now stretched seamlessly around the tent, trapping them inside. A voice boomed from above. "Welcome, dear guests, to tonight's performance." Ethan's blood ran cold. The mannequins froze in place, their heads snapping upward toward the rafters. He followed their gaze, his heart slamming against his ribs. A figure stood on the highest platform, shrouded in the tattered remnants of a ringmaster's coat. His face was obscured by a cracked porcelain mask, the painted features frozen in a grotesque grin. He lifted his cane, tapping it twice against the metal beam beneath him. "We have waited so long," the ringmaster said, his voice crawling through the air like smoke. "And now, the show shall finally begin." Ethan took a step back, his pulse hammering. The mannequins turned in unison, their empty faces locked onto him. Their movements were slow, methodical, like puppets being controlled by invisible strings. The girl grabbed his wrist again, her fingers ice cold. She shook her head violently and pointed toward the far side of the tent. Ethan followed her motion and saw it, a jagged tear in the fabric, just big enough to slip through. But the mannequins were closing in. The ringmaster tilted his head, tapping his cane again. No one leaves the forgotten carnival. Not until the final act. The floor beneath Ethan trembled. The wooden stage split apart, revealing a dark abyss where the center ring should have been. A foul wind rushed upward, carrying with it the unmistakable stench of decay. The mannequins moved faster now, their jerky steps turning into a frantic march. Their arms twitched, their fingers stretching toward him. The girl pulled Ethan hard, dragging him toward the opening in the fabric. He didn't resist. He ran, his breath burning in his chest. The ringmaster's laughter echoed behind him, rising in pitch as the air grew heavy with whispers. The moment Ethan reached the tear, the girl shoved him forward. He stumbled, falling onto cold, damp grass outside the tent. He turned just in time to see the girl standing at the threshold. The mannequins didn't follow, but the ringmaster did. He loomed just behind her, his mask now cracked wider, revealing dark, hollow eyes beneath. He reached for the girl, his gloved fingers curling around her shoulder. She didn't fight. She only looked at Ethan, silent, pleading, before the tear in the tent stitched itself shut. The laughter inside the big top faded. And then, there was silence. Ethan scrambled to his feet, his chest heaving. The carnival was dark once more, the eerie glow of the lights gone. He turned in a circle, his mind spinning. The girl had saved him, but she was still trapped inside. And the ringmaster was watching. From the shadows of the carnival, his voice slithered through the night. One ticket. One show. One soul. Ethan knew he had to leave. But something inside him whispered, this wasn't over. Ethan stumbled away from the sealed tent, his breath coming in shallow gasps. The carnival around him was still, eerily quiet. The The once blazing lights had dimmed to a faint, pulsing glow, like the heartbeat of something ancient and hungry. He turned, half expecting the tent to vanish like a trick of the mind. But it remained, looming, its fabric shifting as if it were breathing. The girl was still inside. And so was he. The ringmaster. Ethan's hands trembled as he reached for his phone. No service. No surprise. His heart pounded as he debated his next move. He could run, leave this cursed place behind and pretend he never stepped foot inside. But the girl had saved him. She had been trapped in there, forced to play a role in whatever twisted performance had been repeating for decades, maybe even longer. Ethan clenched his jaw. He couldn't just leave her. A whisper drifted through the air. "You're still on the grounds." Ethan whirled around. The voice came from nowhere and everywhere at once. His skin prickled. The carnival wasn't letting him go. The realization hit him like a punch to the gut. The moment he had taken that ticket, he had sealed his fate. One ticket. One show. One soul. A rustling sound made him turn toward the carousel. The horses stood motionless, frozen mid-gallop, their glass eyes reflecting the dim glow of the midway. But something had changed. A new figure sat on one of the horses. A boy, no older than 10, dressed in old-fashioned clothes. His face was pale, his eyes dark voids. His head tilted slowly as he whispered, "You can't run. The carnival knows." Ethan's breath hitched. The boy's lips didn't move, but the words crawled into his mind like a creeping shadow. He took a step back, and the carnival reacted. The lights flickered. The air grew thick with the scent of rust and damp earth. A slow, metallic creak echoed from behind him. Ethan spun just in time to see the Ferris wheel begin to turn, its empty seat swaying, its rusted gears groaning against time itself. And then, a scream. Muffled. Desperate. From inside the tent. The girl. Ethan's hesitation vanished. His fear no longer mattered. He had to get her out. He sprinted toward the tent, ignoring the whispering shadows, the flickering lights, the boy on the carousel watching him with empty eyes. His pulse thundered as he reached the fabric. This time, it didn't resist. It let him in. The moment he stepped inside, the entrance disappeared behind him. The air was thick with fog, curling around his legs like ghostly fingers. The mannequins were gone. The stage was empty. But something was waiting for him. From the darkness, the ringmaster's voice coiled around him like a serpent. "You came back." A figure stepped forward, half shrouded in shadows. But it wasn't the girl. It was someone else. Someone who looked exactly like Ethan. Ethan froze. His breath caught in his throat as he stared at the figure before him. It was him. Same face. Same clothes. Same terrified expression. But the other Ethan smiled. A slow, unnatural grin stretched across his face, a smile too wide, too knowing. The dim carnival lights cast jagged shadows over his features, making him look almost inhuman. "I knew you'd come back," the doppelganger whispered, his voice a perfect mirror of Ethan's own. Ethan's pulse thundered in his ears. His own reflection should not be talking to him. This isn't real. It can't be real. He clenched his fists, his nails digging into his palms, grounding himself in pain. The air inside the tent was thick with the scent of dust and something else, something metallic, like rusted iron. Blood. The girl. He forced himself to move, his eyes scanning the darkened stage. She had screamed. He had heard it. But she was nowhere to be seen. The other Ethan took a step closer. "You shouldn't have come back," he said, tilting his head. "But since you have, let's play a game." Ethan backed away. "Where is she?" His voice was steadier than he felt. The doppelganger chuckled. It was a chilling sound, one that made Ethan's skin crawl. "Oh, you mean the girl? She's playing her part." Ethan's stomach twisted. "What do you mean?" The doppelganger gestured toward the stage, where a new figure stepped into the dim light. Ethan's blood ran cold. It was her. But she wasn't the same. Her eyes were dull, lifeless, her movements stiff, like a puppet on invisible strings. Her mouth opened, but no words came out. Instead, a low, distorted whisper filled the air. "Run!" The tent shuddered. The walls rippled like something was pushing against them from the outside, trying to break through. The lights flickered, casting long, shifting shadows. The doppelganger took another step closer. "You still don't get it, do you?" His voice was calm, almost amused. "You're not the audience anymore. You're the act." The girl's whisper became more frantic. "Run! Run!" Ethan didn't hesitate. He turned and bolted toward where the entrance had been, but the fabric of the tent was solid, as if it had been sewn shut. He clawed at it, his breath coming in ragged gasps. The air behind him grew heavy, charged with something dark and ancient. Then, a hand on his shoulder. Ice shot through his veins. The doppelganger leaned in, his breath cold against Ethan's ear. The carnival doesn't let anyone leave. The tent collapsed inward, swallowing them whole. Ethan's scream never left his throat. The tent walls rushed inward, suffocating him in darkness. The air thickened, pressing against his skin like damp, heavy fabric. Then, silence. No wind. No carnival sounds. Just an endless, pulsing void. He stumbled forward, his hands clawing at nothingness. His feet touched something solid, but it wasn't the stage anymore. The air smelled different, old, decayed, forgotten. A single flickering light bulb buzzed to life above him, casting an eerie glow. He stood in the middle of a narrow corridor, the walls lined with mirrors. They weren't normal mirrors. They weren't reflecting him. Ethan's breath hitched as he stepped closer to one. Instead of his own reflection, he saw someone else, a young man in a dusty carnival uniform, his eyes hollow, his mouth twisted in a silent plea. Then the man blinked. Ethan jerked back. The reflections weren't frozen images. They were watching him. A whisper slithered through the corridor. "Help us." Ethan spun around. The girl stood at the end of the hallway, her head tilted at an unnatural angle. Her lifeless eyes stared through him, her lips moving without sound. Then, her voice came, not from her mouth, but from the mirrors. "You have to play the game." A cold dread crawled up Ethan's spine. What game? The lights flickered. The mirrors trembled. Then, all at once, they shattered. Glass exploded around him, razor-sharp shards flying through the air. Ethan threw his arms up to shield his face, but none of them touched him. Instead, figures emerged from the broken mirrors. Dozens of them. Carnival performers with sunken faces. Twisted clowns with smeared makeup. Men and women in vintage costumes, their bodies stiff like marionettes. And at the center, the doppelganger. He stood there, unfazed, watching Ethan with cold amusement. "Welcome to the main attraction," he said. Ethan's pulse pounded. "I don't want to play." The doppelganger's smile widened. "You don't have a choice." The figures lurched forward, their empty eyes locked onto Ethan. The walls of the corridor began closing in, the space shrinking, forcing him closer to them. The girl's voice echoed again, barely a whisper, "Run." Ethan didn't need to be told twice. He turned and sprinted, his heart hammering as the corridor twisted and warped around him. Shadows stretched unnaturally, clawing at his ankles. The figures chased him, their footsteps unnervingly silent. The mirrors ahead shifted, rearranging like a living maze. A single doorway appeared at the end, its wooden frame cracked and splintered. A sign above it read, "Exit." Ethan pushed himself harder, his breath ragged. His fingers brushed the doorknob, hands grabbed his ankles. Cold, lifeless hands. The floor ripped open beneath him, and he fell. Ethan's scream was swallowed by the abyss as he plummeted into darkness. The air around him was thick and suffocating, pressing against his skin like unseen hands. Then, impact. He landed hard on something soft. Not ground. Not wood. Fabric. Ethan groaned and pushed himself up. He was lying on a massive pile of discarded carnival costumes, torn and dust-covered, as if left to rot. The scent of mildew and something rotten clung to the air. Dim, flickering lanterns illuminated the space. Rows upon rows of lifeless marionettes lined the walls, their glass eyes staring blankly ahead. Ethan's pulse quickened. A whisper crawled through the air. "New player." Ethan turned sharply. The girl was there again, standing just outside the lantern's glow. Her face was pale, her expression unreadable. "What do you want from me?" Ethan's voice was hoarse. She didn't answer. Instead, she raised a trembling hand and pointed behind him. Ethan turned, and nearly choked on his breath. The doppelganger stood in front of the largest marionette, its wooden limbs strung up by thick, sinewy cords. Its face was grotesque, its painted smile stretched too wide. The doppelganger's voice was calm. "You don't belong here." Ethan backed away. "Then let me go." The doppelganger sighed, as if disappointed. "It's not that simple. The carnival chooses who stays." The marionettes twitched. Their heads snapped toward Ethan in perfect unison. The girl finally spoke, her voice brittle. "They were like you. Once." A sick realization crawled into Ethan's mind. The carnival didn't just trap people. It turned them into part of the attraction. The doppelganger took a slow step forward. "You have one last chance." Ethan's muscles tensed. "Chance for what?" "To take my place." The words hit like a gut punch. Ethan shook his head, stepping backward. "No, I won't." The doppelganger's expression darkened. "Then you become one of them." The marionettes lurched forward, their wooden fingers twitching, reaching for him. The cords above tightened, making them move like puppets on an unseen stage. Ethan turned and ran. The girl's voice followed him, desperate. "The Ferris wheel. Find the Ferris wheel." Ethan had no idea what she meant, but there was no time to ask. The marionettes moved faster, their stiff limbs creaking. Shadows twisted unnaturally, stretching toward him. Ahead, an archway loomed, its sign barely legible under layers of dust and grime. "Performers only." Ethan had no choice. He lunged through the doorway, and the world shifted. The scent of old wood and dust vanished, replaced by something else. Something cold. Ethan stood at the foot of a massive Ferris wheel, its rusted frame groaning in the wind. The girl appeared beside him. "The ride isn't over yet." The Ferris wheel loomed over Ethan like a rusted skeleton, its metal frame groaning with the whisper of forgotten voices. The seats swayed without wind, casting elongated shadows against the cold ground. The girl stood beside him, her presence flickering like a candle. "You have to get on," she whispered. Ethan clenched his fists. "Why? What's up there?" Her expression darkened. "Memories. Answers. But the carnival won't let you leave without a fight." A low creak echoed through the air. Ethan turned. The doppelganger was there, standing at the entrance to the ride. But he wasn't alone. The marionettes followed him, their wooden limbs twitching unnaturally. Their hollow eyes locked onto Ethan, strings writhing like snakes from their joints. "Ethan." The doppelganger's voice was eerily calm. "The ride isn't for you." Ethan backed toward the Ferris wheel. "You can't stop me." The doppelganger's smile widened. "I don't have to." The ground beneath Ethan rumbled. The carnival itself was shifting, its very fabric pulsing like a living thing. The marionettes lurched forward, their strings lashing toward Ethan. The girl grabbed his wrist. "Now." Ethan didn't hesitate. He sprinted toward the Ferris wheel, leaping onto the closest rusted seat just as it lurched upward. The doppelganger didn't move. He simply watched, his hands folded neatly behind his back. "You won't like what you find." Ethan ignored him. The Ferris wheel groaned, the gears shrieking as it carried him higher. Below, the carnival rippled, shifting like a mirage. The lights flickered erratically, revealing glimpses of twisted faces in the darkness. He swallowed hard. Then, the wheel snapped. The ride spun violently, time distorting around Ethan. He felt like he was being pulled through decades of history, through echoes of the past. His vision blurred. And then, he wasn't on the Ferris wheel anymore. He was in Blackridge. But not the ruinous, haunted remains. No. This was the carnival as it once was. Alive. The scent of roasted peanuts and popcorn filled the air. The sound of laughter, real, genuine laughter, echoed through the park. Families walked hand in hand, their faces full of joy. Ethan stood in the middle of it all, his breath caught in his throat. A voice called his name. He turned. A man in a black suit stood by the ticket booth, watching him with an amused expression. "You finally made it." Ethan's pulse pounded. "Who are you?" The man's smile widened. "The owner of this carnival, of course." Ethan's breath hitched. The original owner had died decades ago. So why was he standing right in front of him? Ethan's throat went dry. The man in the black suit stood before him, impossibly real, despite being long dead. "You're the owner?" Ethan asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The man chuckled, adjusting the cuffs of his suit. "Once upon a time, yes. But titles mean little here." His eyes gleamed with something unreadable. "You've come far, Ethan." "Too far." Ethan's muscles tensed. "What is this place?" The man gestured around them. The carnival was alive. Children laughed, rides whirred, and a soft golden glow bathed everything in an unnatural light. "This is how it was," the man said. "Before it became what you know." Ethan's heart pounded. "What happened?" The man's smile faded. "A mistake. A deal gone wrong. And now," he waved a hand. Instantly, the golden glow flickered. The laughter turned distorted, the cheerful crowd blurring like melting wax. The Ferris wheel slowed, its lights dying one by one. The carnival withered before Ethan's eyes, the past decaying into the horrific present he had come to know. The man sighed. "This place is cursed, Ethan. And so is everyone who steps inside." Ethan took a step back. "Then why am I here?" The man studied him for a long moment. "Because you were chosen." Ethan's pulse thundered. "Chosen for what?" A low growl echoed behind him. He turned. The doppelganger. Standing at the entrance of a black tent, its fabric shifting like liquid. The marionettes flanked him, their wooden faces cracked and splintered. "It's time." The doppelganger's voice was calm, but something about it sent a chill down Ethan's spine. The man in the suit exhaled. "You're at the end now." Ethan shook his head. "No, I can still leave." The man's expression darkened. "This carnival doesn't let anyone leave, Ethan." The tent entrance widened, like a mouth waiting to swallow him whole. Ethan turned to the girl. "What do I do?" Her eyes shone with something close to sorrow. "You have to go inside." Ethan's hands curled into fists. The final door was waiting, and he had no choice but to step through. Ethan's legs felt heavy as he stepped toward the black tent. The fabric shimmered like liquid shadow, rippling at his approach. The doppelganger watched, its face eerily still, while the marionettes stood beside it, their heads tilted at unnatural angles. The suited man sighed. "Once you go in, there's no turning back." Ethan clenched his fists. "I never had a choice, did I?" The man smiled, a sad, knowing smile, then the tent swallowed him whole. Inside, there was no carnival, no twisted rides, no haunted laughter, just a single spotlight, shining down on a massive, circular stage. The rest of the space stretched into endless blackness. Ethan felt a presence behind him. The doppelganger. It moved forward, stepping into the light. Ethan's breath hitched, because for the first time, he saw it clearly. It wasn't just a reflection of him. It was him. Or rather, the version of him that never escaped. The doppelganger's mouth curled into a smirk. "You finally understand." Ethan took a step back. "What are you?" The figure tilted its head, eyes gleaming. "The last one. The one who stayed." Ethan shook his head. "That's not possible." The doppelganger's grin widened. "Oh, but it is. Every visitor leaves something behind, Ethan. A memory. A fear. A part of their soul. But some of us..." It spread its arms. "Some of us become part of the show." A loud creak echoed through the tent. Above them, the rafters groaned, and suddenly, strings shot down from the darkness, wrapping around Ethan's wrists, ankles, neck. He gasped, trying to pull free, but they tightened, lifting him off the ground. The doppelganger stepped back, its features shifting, becoming more real, more solid, as Ethan felt himself fading. No, this isn't happening. The shadows whispered all around him. The carnival needed a new performer, and Ethan was its final act. Outside, the neon lights flickered. The rides slowed. The carnival sighed. And a new figure stood at the entrance. A man in a black suit, watching as the next visitor approached. The forgotten carnival always needed more guests. And the show must go on.